change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hey, welcome back everyone to a new episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. I am Nathan Chappell and I'm here with Scott Rosenkrantz. I've been looking forward to this episode, as you know, for a couple of weeks. I've probably been driving you crazy talking about it. Scott and I decided that we were going to dedicate an entire episode to the topic of autonomous fundraising. So that is this episode. So Scott, this is kind of the moment I think we've all been waiting for. At least it's the moment I can say that I've been waiting for. I don't want to subject you to my biases here. Back in 2017, started working in machine learning, truly understood kind of that idea that with great prediction comes great responsibility, or whatever we want, great power. And it became clear in 2017 that we as an industry are going to face lots of questions and challenges, and that we were going to be faced with big esoteric and philosophical questions. And I think we find ourselves there today. And so while I come to this conversation excited because it's a big topic and a big philosophical conversation, I also come to it with a lot of angst, because what we're talking about actually has massive implications on the sector, has massive implications on society and communities at large. So I think it's going to be a good episode to kind of wrestle with some stuff.
Yeah, I'm excited. I don't know if I've been excited for this moment. I'm excited to talk about this because you and I have been talking about it for a couple of weeks now, definitely more in the past few weeks. But yeah, this moment is upon us.
Countries. A few weeks ago, there was information that was online that was talking about autonomous fundraising, and essentially how we could essentially remove humans from the fundraising ecosystem, that we could autonomously, meaning without human intervention, we could essentially find prospects, curate prospects, solicit money, steward gifts, and all of that without any human intervention. And I know, like you, myself, got a number of text messages and emails and had lots of conversations since then on, what is the stance of fundraising AI? What are your thoughts on this? And I think we always predicted this conversation would happen. I mean, to be honest, if you had asked me, I would have said that we would be having this conversation a year from now. But that speaks to pretty much every episode that we've had for the last 27 episodes on the exponential pace of AI development, that we're not talking about static technology. We're talking about technology that moves faster because it actually is improving itself. So, maybe we shouldn't have been surprised that, we're here today having this conversation because we talk about exponential technology a lot. But nevertheless, we anticipated it for a number of years. So I don't know, Scott, what's your reaction, I guess, as we kind of dive into this, and what our plan is? Actually, I'll just level set for everyone, is that we're going to talk about autonomous fundraising. We're not going to talk about any people. We're not going to talk about any companies or their view in this. We're going to keep this very high level. And we're also going to talk about it from a holistic perspective. We'll talk about pros for it and the rationale for autonomous fundraising, essentially removing human fundraisers from the fundraising equilibrium. But we're also going to talk about it from a cons side as well. So we'll talk about promise and perils, and then we'll wrap up with just some concluding thoughts. And I probably was thinking about this morning. This is probably going to have to be, a part one of a multi-part series, because this topic is so big and so evolving. So going back to, I guess, Scott, when this came out, I know I wasn't the only one that texted you. What were the reactions that you were getting from people? They were for it, against it, and everything in between?
There was definitely an overwhelming majority of people who were against it, right? People who in our sector, just knowing this is not the way we should be moving, right? It's interesting because the day it came out, I was on site with a client. I was talking about, again, our typical day-to-day work of predictive modeling and so on. And one of the people I was speaking with said, "You're really taking the human out of this." And I was like, "Well, you're taking the human out of fundraising," they said. And I was like, "Well, no, we're taking the human out of the part that the human doesn't need to be involved in, so you could spend more time where the human needs to be involved. Face-to-face interactions with your donors, with your constituents, with those who are engaging with you, because that's where the technology shouldn't be. That's where the AI and the robot shouldn't be. AI can sift through data all day, every day, much better than we can. Let it do that so you could do your part better.
Right. So
And
you're
so
referring,
I think,
just to recap, so you're referring to the predictive AI side, essentially taking lots of data, providing direction to fundraisers so that they could do their job more effectively. And in the argument being that, while AI, we talk about the ROI of AI, the return on investment on AI is not about raising more money, it's about gaining the dividend of time. And so you're talking about how AI can create that dividend of time and then allow those fundraisers to spend more time doing human to human kind of interaction.
exactly. Yeah. Instead of spending your time sifting through data to find the people that you want to engage with, have the AI feed that name to you, right? Or prioritize those names, feed it through a prospect researcher to qualify them. And then you spend your time in front of that person, right?
Right.
Learning about that person, finding out why they're engaged with you, what their interests are, what their dislikes are, so that you can build a relationship, right?
And what was the reaction? So again, so you were talking to someone that was like using AI in a very ubiquitous term. So it's like AI is just going to replace people. You're replacing people because that's kind of one of the narratives around it versus augmenting people. After you explained that, was it like a full, about face? Was it just like, I don't believe you? Or did they really understand the kind of the rationality of that conversation?
I mean, I think it was a brief kind of like an aside at the end of the conversation, right? So where this came up, and I mentioned that because again, that happened that day. You had already sent me the link that there are now autonomous fundraisers, right? That's where the conversation turned. Like, okay, that is taking the human out of where the human should be, right? So it really kind of putting both sides of the coin there, right? The predictive side behind the scenes, right? That quantifying versus the qualitative, that subjective, that relationship, human to human interaction. That's where we should be staying involved across the
Right.
board.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's dive into. I'll do a little bit, just a 2 minutes of level setting, kind of just to tee this up, and then Scott, you and I will debate both the pros. We'll actually say this is a pro of replacing fundraisers, so that sounds weird to say, and then we'll talk about the cons of replacing fundraisers. So this at the fundamental level speaks to this topic that you and I have shared probably on every single episode and probably in every in-person conversation and webinar we've done over the last couple of years, is that AI will not replace fundraisers, but fundraisers who use AI will replace those that do not. So again, AI will not replace fundraisers, but those who use AI will replace those who not. That's a generally accepted principle in the world, not just in fundraising, even not for just people, but even in organizations. Those that use AI will replace those that don't. It's a pretty common and broadly accepted kind of sentiment. This idea of autonomous fundraisers completely challenges that. So we are now faced with like, is that statement even true? Will AI replace fundraisers? And so that's really the topic of this conversation. But I want to start by reading a quote. It's one of my favorite quotes. It comes from Mustafa Solomon, who now is at Microsoft. He was the head of Google DeepMind in, I think it was somewhere 2007. Google DeepMind actually beat the grand champion at the game Go, which took 20 years from the time that, IBM Deep Blue beat the world champion at playing chess. So Mustafa Solomon knows a thing or two about AI. His book, The Coming Wave, is one of my favorite books of last year. He said in this reading the book, and it was a point where I had to write this down, and it's been in probably every presentation I've done since then. It says, this is going to be the most productive decade in the history of our species, but we need to learn how and when to say no collectively. So this is going to be the most productive decade in the history of our species, but we need to learn how and when to say no collectively. And this is the thing, I think, if I distill that down, it really comes down to this idea of just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. Mustafa is talking about these incredible advances that AI has had and has potential to have, but just because it can do something doesn't mean that it's good for humanity. It's also what led us to, with fundraising AI, land on the word beneficial. That responsible AI is this minimum expectation of ethics and privacy and security. But we as a sector, as a nonprofit sector, have to ensure that AI is also beneficial, not just to the short term, but to the long term of humanity. We're talking about fundraising, and we're talking about the purity and the sanctity of an organization and a person to help support a human need or the environment, that this is this sacred space that has always been and still remains today largely human-centric, and that human centricity is essentially being challenged at this moment. So I think that Mustafa's statement, it just hits home so much. Is this a moment where we have to say no collectively? And I think that's exciting because it leads to a lot of robust conversations and a lot of debate. It also led me to a wake up kind of, in a sweat kind of thing the other day. About a week ago, I was getting ready for a keynote and I woke up with this idea in my head, which was that, there's a very subtle but profound difference in asking someone for money and manipulating someone to give. Taken, a certificate course on philanthropic psychology. We've been in the nonprofit sector for a very long time. That AI has tremendous ability to convince humans to do things. We took our philanthropic psychology class. I know I shared this with you, is that for every test in the 8 modules, I took the test and then I pasted the test into ChatGPT, and this is ChatGPT 3.5, I think, and it outperformed me on every single test. So 8 out of 8 tests, it had a better grade than I did. It understands human behavior, understands human psychology, understands donor behavior. And therefore, this idea that, there's a subtle but profound difference in asking someone for money and manipulating them to make a gift is a modern day reality. Like, this is a reality today. And I think for me, the difference is the bot will not know the difference. A bot will just have a single goal, which would be to, most likely, extract a gift from an individual. That's what reinforced learning looks like. I got a gift from this individual, therefore I'm successful. I'll do more of that same thing. That becomes, to me, a lot more manipulative than it does essentially embracing an individual. There's some stats in here in some of our notes, Scott. I was thinking that you could read these. Ethan Mollick, who's one of our favorites to follow, and I think we have to pay him royalties every time we bring up his name. He had a couple of crazy stats that we have in our notes. You want to read those? Because just to highlight what I was just sharing, that it's not just this, I'm not just saying words to say like, hey, AI is really good at manipulating people. Like, read these stats because I think people would be surprised about them.
Yeah. So again, coming from Ethan Mollick, if you debate with an AI, they are 87% more likely to persuade you to their assigned viewpoint than if you debate with an average human. 87%, right? And I think that's the one that speaks most specifically to what we're talking about here. If they have a viewpoint of, I want a gift from you, and you have a viewpoint of, I'm not sure if I want a gift, or if I want to make a gift, you're more likely to make that gift when having that conversation with an autonomous fundraiser. The next one is GPT-4 helps people reappraise a difficult emotional situation better than 85% of humans, beating human advice givers on the effectiveness, novelty, and empathy of their reappraisal. So again, it doesn't have empathy, but it's able to mimic that behavior in a way to build that rapport with the individual and empathize, sympathize, get them to feel better about a negative situation that they found themselves in. Third one, GPT-4 generates startup ideas that outside judges find to be better than those of trained business school students. So even if you've gone to school, spent a lot of money to get a specific education, this tool, which is $20 a month, is better at coming up with creative, novel ideas than you are.
Yeah.
And then lastly,
actually, let's not even go in the last one. Let's just stick with these three because I think they're so profound. So like AI, 87% more likely to convince you to stop smoking or to take a certain therapy or whatever than average human. So AI, because they've read every book on human behavior and psychology, everything that's been written, every study, are really, really good at this. And then, the other part is that, that empathy side of things, like displaying signs of empathy are not the same as being empathetic. And we've said this since I think the first week that ChatGPT came out. It was a statement that I wrote on LinkedIn, which is just, sounding authentic is not the same as being authentic. But it's amazing to think in just a couple of years, 2 years, I don't know how long it's been, I guess a year and a half since GPT came out, that 87% more likely to persuade you, 85% better at displaying basically human empathy than a human. And then the last part is, I wanted you to read that because it's around creativity. Right? It's the ability to outpace humans in a creative approach, which is, all those things combined are pretty crazy. So I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I decided I think you should be why don't you make the arguments for replacing humans? And this is not to say this is your belief, so full disclaimer, Scott does not believe that we should replace human fundraisers. But why don't
this
you...
is not endorsed by Scott Rosencrantz.
Right,
Skit
right,
Rosencrantz.
Skit, caboodle, Rosencrantz. Why don't you talk about some of these, the reasons for it? Because I think they're strong reasons to replace humans from fundraising. And then I'll share some of the reasons against it, and we'll have a conversation around both of those.
Yeah, and I mean, we talk about these reasons, like there is a challenge that needs to be solved, right? So we're not saying that there isn't a challenge, but that challenge, part of the things here is fundraisers are burnt out, right? Burnout is a major issue in the nonprofit sector. We talk about that SISR report, social impact survey response. I always mess that up, but 78% of people in the nonprofit sector are either looking for a job or not planning on working in the nonprofit sector in the next 12 months, right? Like burnout is huge. So that is a challenge that needs to be resolved. Do we want to debate on each point or just go through, I make all my points?
No, I think just go through. I mean, and then highlight them. I mean, fundraisers are expensive. They're burned out. Right. I mean, those are common, acknowledgments. I mean, I don't think anyone disagrees about those.
Right. They're ineffective, right? You're coming in with your own perspective, your own, insecurities, whatever it is, into this and trying to get something out of the other individual. There's also way too many constituents for any nonprofit to manage with their staff of fundraisers, right? We've worked with hundreds of organizations and the ratio is 1 to 500,000. Like it's insane. So there's no way that you're going to be able to meet with all the people that want to meet with you with staff that you're hiring.
Yeah.
And then bots are more effective at convincing people, right? You even throw out that example, I want to touch back on that. You said 87% better at persuading you not to smoke. That's if their goal is to persuade you not to smoke.
Right.
Their goal is to persuade you to smoke. They're also better at that.
Yeah. You have a master's in psychology. I don't know, when you think about this, does that challenge like things that you learned in grad school around psychology, just purely from that perspective, the ability for AI to persuade you to do something? Like, I don't know if you have a hot take on that.
It's interesting because when I was going to grad school, my brother was also going to school to become an interrogator, right? And we were learning similar things of, you build rapport with an individual to get information from them with just different reasons, different objectives, right? One is for benefit of the country, one is benefit for that person. So like the tactics are still there. It's just what is the outcome? And again, that ties back to the beneficial part of the FAI framework, right? It's not just, is it responsible? Sure, they might be engaging in responsible ways. Is it ethical? They might be engaging in ethical ways, but is they engaging in a beneficial way for the sector and for humanity by manipulating people to do this?
Right.
Not doing a very good job at staying on the pro bots should replace fundraisers. I realize that now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so on that pro side, I mean, again, like these are things. I spent 20 years in the fundraising world. I mean, fundraisers are expensive. They require lots of training. They require lots of hand holding and things like that. There's another sediment. Ann Murphy and I were talking last week, and she was she's a recovering fundraiser turned, AI junkie in the last year and a half. And, she's like, well, isn't it what we're doing is, when we have scripts for, say, in colleges where they use students to essentially raise money, like we've kind of turned those fundraisers into robots. And we have, and this also leads to, a lot of burnout. And, I think this calls the question of like, if we know that there's these issues, right? Burnout and ineffectiveness. Our good friend Mallory Erickson is a book coming out October 1st called What the Fundraising, which talks about from a brain perspective on how to overcome that burnout and how to fix some of the organizational issues around fundraising burnout. I think the lure here is that from an economic perspective, like, yeah, burnout's high, they're ineffective, they're expensive, they're hard to find, they're hard to keep, and all those things that, instead of paying for one fundraiser, I could pay for 1,000 bots that would go out with a single objective, which would be to extract a gift. So I think this is where, as a society and as a sector right now, we're faced with this really difficult esoteric question of again, beating the drum. Just because we can, does it mean we should? And so I'll go into a couple of the reasons why we shouldn't do this. Like, we can do it. Why we shouldn't do this? First is probably the lowest hanging fruit. And it's a personal belief, but also there's a report that came out this week that actually validated my personal belief, is that people really don't like customer service bots. And Gartner, we all have been on those calls, right? We call American Airlines or AT&T or whoever it might be. And, you're like, try to hit pound or whatever. You try to yell at the phone to get through so that it recognizes you're an unhappy customer. This report by Gartner came out, and it's interesting. The name of the report was "Ordinary People Are Absolutely Repulsed by AI-Powered Customer Service." So it wasn't just like people don't like it. It was the title of the article that came out is "Ordinary People Are Absolutely Repulsed by AI-Powered Customer Service." So 84% of people surveyed by Gartner said that they do not want companies to use AI customer service. So 64%. 53% took it a step further and said that they'd consider switching to a competitor if they learned that a company was using AI in a customer service role. And so it doesn't take us much to think about, like, what would that look like in the nonprofit sector if donors were surveyed? So if donors were surveyed and you were asked, like, what are your thoughts on this nonprofit using AI to ask for money? I'm pretty sure it'd be a lot higher than the average consumer when they're talking about buying cell phones or new pairs of shoes. So that's, number one against it is that people don't like bots. And, in some cases they can be very helpful, but in many cases we're still kind of wired to be, from a human perspective. Mm-hmm. So I actually just got a book on this. I mean, and actually I tend to believe that AI cannot be conscious, that it actually can't ever think about what is it like to be me itself. Maybe I'll be proven wrong in many years to come, but if that happens, I think we're probably, society as a large is probably doomed. But it can display signs of empathy so much so that it can be convincing to convince you to stop smoking or make a gift or something like that, which means it can manipulate people, fairly easily. In fact, I would be happy to help you manipulate someone to make a gift. And I don't know, I've never tried this with GPT. It may preclude you from using that word, but it's very easy to hack and use different words that have the same sort of goal in mind. I also would make the argument against this that philanthropy, which essentially stands for the love of humankind, is a human-centric condition. Like, it requires humans in the loop to remain pure, because it's not about, money and a mission. It's about creating a fabric of community that exists in throughout generations for society that come together, that we as a species have this pro-social behavior. The pro-social behavior is that we'll give of ourselves, even if it costs us something, to benefit humanity, whether it's this generation or future generations. That pro-social behavior is wired in us as humans from a biological perspective. That is the reason why we give a gift or volunteer. That's why we release, serotonin and dopamine, that we feel better when we help someone. That is because our brains are literally wired to do that. That we also, our industry operates in this currency of trust. That trust is something that has to be uniquely human. Now, not to say AI systems can't be trustworthy if they're programmed to be trustworthy, but you just shared, if the objective is to be trustworthy, it will be trustworthy. If the objective is not centered around trust, it will not. So it can only do what it's actually trained to do. And I really think one of the biggest reasons for me to not allow for autonomous fundraising would really be this idea that it will pull donors away from organizations, that the human-centric aspect of keeping humans front and center and engaged in all aspects of fundraising is that sacred space between a donor and an organization, that neither one could do something on their own, but together they could do something, greater. Doesn't matter how much money it is, because philanthropy is not about money. It's about coming together, exercising those pro-social behaviors, and doing something that you feel like you're part of connectedness. And the last thing I'll share is that Arthur Brooks, who we also mention on this podcast a lot, is the professor at Harvard that teaches on happiness. He just wrote a book with Oprah. He's probably one of the leading authorities on happiness. Just did this quick thing the other day talking about the loneliness epidemic. And in large part, this loneliness epidemic that we're facing in the country is an epidemic of mass proportions, that, things like, happiness has declined, and suicide, especially among teens, has increased, depression's increased. is because we're trying to, exercise human behaviors of wanting to connect, but we're doing that via a screen. And things like social media and other things like even Zoom lead to this because your brain releases oxytocin through making eye contact and through touch. And through a screen, even if it's a Zoom or in social media, we as humans are not getting this. So I'd hate to think that our sector could be reinforcing and actually contributing to the loneliness epidemic because we have decided that, that revenue is more important than relationships, essentially, that we'll offload humans because we could just do so much more by automating this giving kind of mechanism that, has been human-centric for, millennium. And so I don't know, Scott, what are your thoughts on this as we break this all down?
Yeah, you just touched it right there. Revenue over relationships, right? Like we've been talking about this for a while, right? And yes, we can put together pros for AI replacing fundraisers, right? Fundraisers are notoriously bad at tracking notes on meetings. AI can do it perfectly and summarize sentiment and all this. And they can work 24 hours a day for $20 a month, right? Like many pros there, but all the pros are from the perspective of the organization and financial health of the organization, right? No pros are from the donor side, right? There's no pro for a donor to be stewarded, to be solicited by an autonomous fundraiser, right? And if we're talking about, manipulation, if the goal is to get a gift, we've all been manipulated at some point or another in our lives, and it never feels good, right? And after you get manipulated, you want to avoid the person that manipulated and avoid that situation as much as possible. So yeah, they might succeed in getting a lot of gifts, but they are not going to succeed in maintaining that relationship, maintaining that core donor base, maintaining retention, which again is another epidemic that everyone's seeing, like fewer and fewer donors retaining year after year. That will continue. There might be a spike in total dollars raised and total donors, but that retention is going to continue to dip.
I think you bring up, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I'm absolutely convinced that robots can be effective at asking for money. And so in the short term, I think the economics are going to be like, look, you can put it, to your point, 1,000 bots that cost you collectively $20 a month or whatever it might be, increasingly inexpensive because compute power is cheap, is that you can generate more money in the short term, but long term, you're going to destroy, that trust between you and those individuals. And as I think about, obviously I wrote a book on this topic, is that, the declines in charitable participation over the last 20 years are significant. 16% decline in the number of people that give to charities ever. So less than half of Americans give, and the new data will come out this year, which will be more of the same in an acceleration of this generosity crisis. Is that when you think about, and we survey people that don't give to charity at all, it's because they feel like a charity doesn't care about them. They feel like they're manipulated by a charity. They feel like they don't trust that if they give money that it's going to go to a certain place. It's because they don't have those human relationships. So I think this is the whole thing. Like, yes, we can do this. The technology with, we talk about 11 Labs a lot on here. You can clone your voice in 4 minutes, or just use any, made up voice. And then, through Runway or others, you can use a bot to actually look like a human. Exactly like a human, sound exactly like a human, to ask you for money. You might be convinced or manipulated, or whatever word you want to use, to make that first gift. But as a human, there's no relationship there. There's even, no matter, a bot can tell you a gazillion times how much it loves you and how important you are to the organization. But that's literally just programming. It's only telling you exactly what it will do to achieve its objective, which is for you to make that gift and probably make another gift after that. So it will tell you exactly what you need to hear, or it believes you need to hear to reinforce that. But no relationships are being forged. And I think people know that. Intuitively, we know that.
And all that we've talked so far is under the assumption that this works the way it's designed, right? But how many examples are there of chatbots going wrong? Right? They're the classic example of Microsoft's chatbot on Twitter that turned anti-Semitic in 24 hours, right? There was that one nonprofit that replaced their call center staff with a chatbot that was delivering harmful advice within 24 hours. It was, I think, Alaska Airlines had a chatbot that, somebody came in and said, "You lost my luggage," and they offered them free lifetime miles forever. Like, this could go horribly wrong a number of ways, let alone the trust, the relationship building, the transaction over all that. So like there's so many reasons why this shouldn't be where we are. Yes, AI is incredibly helpful, but that doesn't mean it needs to be used everywhere just because it can.
Yeah, I think about the statement you and I use this a lot when we do presentations is, AI is inevitable. So the use of AI in fundraising is inevitable. Those that do versus those that don't are going to be on a digital divide. So the use of AI is inevitable, but the effective use of it, the beneficial use of it is not. And so again, I think we'll probably, as we kind of wrap this up, thinking that this is going to be one of a many part series. And this is a controversial topic for sure. And I think it's great. I think the worst thing we could do is not talk about it. Apathy around this idea of like, well, yeah, nobody likes bots, so let's just not even talk about it, because, the market will prove itself out, is the worst thing we could do. The best thing we could do is really understand and really ratify our beliefs on whether or not humans are central to the future of fundraising. And I think that's what hopefully Scott and I have really sparked some curiosity today and some debate today to really wrestle with the pros and cons on this and maybe the appropriate applications of this versus the inappropriate, and leave people with this, this sense that we are in control, that, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And I know there's a lure with like new technology. We shouldn't just say no because it's new and it's different. I mean, trust me, Scott and I are like probably the two most early adopters you'll find. We love new things. And for us, we have to measure those new things with, does this support, what are the implications of this? Does this support short-term goals and the long-term beneficiality to society? I mean, that's something that I think our sector has to wrestle with, that Nike and AT&T and other for-profit entities don't, because the implications of buying shoes or not buying shoes are non-existent compared to our ability to diminish trust at scale and, accelerate the generosity crisis, in ways that won't be good for, this and future generations. So I, for one, I mean, we're 34 minutes in, Scott. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but I feel like hopefully we strike a chord with some people. I'm sure we'll get people that agree with us. I'm sure we'll get people that disagree with us. And I think we continue to, have these conversations, as balanced as possible and encourage our sector to decide on its own, where and where not does the future of our sector have to remain human-centric?
Yeah. And like you said, just as long as this spurs that conversation, right? Again, to anyone listening, like reach out to us. Let us know your thoughts when you see this on LinkedIn, on podcast, whatever it is. Reach out to us and tell us you agree, you disagree. What are things that we haven't thought about? Are you using it? But where do you want to go with this? Like, we want to hear from you. So let's start that conversation.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Scott. I mean, we are both looking forward to this one. Hope we did it justice. There's so much here. I literally get kind of hot and sweaty a little bit talking about this because it's just like, it's so core to my protectionism as a human. 20 years in fundraising, I just get like really passionate about this. And I'm comforted by knowing our sector is full of people like me that are passionate about what we do and care deeply, not just about their organizations, but about the future of our sector as a whole and society at large because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's easy to get heated about this, but you're not alone.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Scott. We will see everyone for another episode next week. Same time, same place, I assume. Although probably different place, but same time, given that, we're both traveling all over the place all the time. Thanks. Always fun. And we'll catch you on the flip side.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.